This is episode 225 of the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Control and Compound Financial. They teach real estate investors how to multiply their wealth using infinite banking strategies. For a complimentary wealth coaching session or to learn more, visit www.controlandcompound.com/Andrew Hines. Welcome back to the show. Today I have Myuren Chanthirakumar, and I'm thinking I'm saying that right. He came on the show, and Myron's an interesting guy. He's a commercial appraiser. I've never had a commercial appraiser on this show, so we talked a lot about valuing buildings, how it works, how he's able to use his career as a commercial appraiser to his benefit. So he's able to look at deals, and he's seen a lot of them. He's seen a lot of comparables. He's worked in a lot of different markets. He knows where things are working and where they're not working as well. And his knowledge led him to Windsor and then Sudbury, where he now focuses the majority of his time. So we talked about how he's doing that at a distance. Very intelligent guy, and he shared a lot of wisdom, a lot of gold nuggets on this episode. It was actually a lot of fun to record, so I think you'll enjoy it as well. A couple of things I just want to remind you of. We do meet monthly at the GTA West REI meetup. Myron is one of the guys that I've seen at the last couple. And there's a lot of other very accomplished investors that come out to these things. And I really enjoy networking with them. And if you're an investor and you'd like to meet and greet and have some conversations, I encourage you to follow the link in the show notes of this episode and make sure you join our private group so that you can be notified the next time we have an event. Beyond that, if you're new to real estate investing and some of the things that we talk about on the show aren't as nuts and bolts as you like, I'd highly recommend heading back to episodes 1 through say 15, where we really focused. I did screen shares, I showed spreadsheets. I really tried to teach those episodes, even though I had guests. I tried to teach them as if people had no concept of real estate investing. They'd never done it. So that was the intent of that. So if you feel that refresher would be helpful for you, head on back to the first episodes and then make your way back to this one. And I think you get a lot more out of it. So just before we jump in, if you could kindly share this episode with somebody that you think would benefit from it. I want to keep this podcast growing. Helping it to continue to grow is what helps me to continue to do this. Bringing on sponsors, allowing for me to keep the production quality high. As you can likely imagine, this is a huge time commitment to do this show and a huge financial commitment. So I would really, really appreciate it if you could help get the word out there and help it continue to grow as you've been doing so far. I really do appreciate it. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode with Myron. Please enjoy. Hello and welcome to the Andrew Hines Real Estate Investing Podcast. I've got Myuren Chanthirakumar. I think I said it right.
You did.
I don't know how I did that. It's a very memorable last name. But anyways, yeah. So thanks for coming down.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
And Myron, I know we've met a handful of times. I actually don't know your full story. I know you're a real estate appraiser, commercial real estate appraiser.
That's correct.
So that's interesting. I don't think we've had that on the podcast before. So we'll dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, of course.
But tell me a little bit about yourself as an investor and what you're up to.
Yeah, for sure. So I started investing by accident in 2019, where I decided to purchase my first property. Before that, we're trying to get into a pre-construction, just a typical, first purchase. Everyone kind of goes there, but that 10-day cooling period, I kind of ran the numbers. So this condominium was in Vaughan by the transit station that they were building at that time. And it was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condominium for $565,000. So this was in 2019. Mm-hmm. And I put in the numbers. It didn't really make sense. And it was a big commitment for those couple of years. So I literally just took a map of Ontario, and the bank said I was qualified for up to $300,000. I was 24 at that time, just out of university, and Windsor made sense. And I went to a couple of open houses, never been to Windsor before, and there was huge lineups in every home where it would be listed at $199,000 and sold for plus $300,000. So I kind of figured that was just a way to get a big pool of buyers coming in and putting offers. So I just went to a property that was listed at asking price at $299, and I was able to negotiate it for $257. And that's when I realized, what cash flow was, because I just rented it at $1,800 and I was making about $800 a month after mortgage, and my 5-year fix was 2.74.
Okay.
I wish even then it was cheap, but looking back, at that in the moment I thought it was expensive, but looking back,
compared to some of the stuff, right? Yeah, you saw people getting 225. Felt like you were missing out.
And that was pre-pandemic rates. So once I got that, tenant didn't pay rent, so I had to figure out how to work that situation out. Pandemic hit, there was restrictions by government in terms of visiting your properties. Even if you owned it, you couldn't really go inside with the tenants. And long story short, was able to get the tenant out. But during the pandemic, there was a lot of online webinars. I wanted to solely base my real estate portfolio on no JV partners. Similar to the Kellen James, I was kind of following him on social media, and I'm like, I got to be able to do this. So learn creative financing, better take back mortgages, did all that. So since 2020, I purchased about 40 units, around 12 properties with no JV partners.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of base of capital were you working off of to make that happen?
Yeah. So my first BRRRR project, I was in Windsor, and I came across an off-market duplex for $140,000, and it was 2 duplexes. I was trying to get both, but I was only able to get one, and I needed the 20% for that $140,000 duplex, so that was $28,000, and I didn't even have that at that time. So what I decided to do was I ran the numbers, and I'm like, I can probably buy this in all cash. Now, I've never done this before, but I looked at the value on the purchase as fully renovated, and it was around the $350,000 mark. So it was like 80% of that, I can still be able to pull majority of my capital out, because the as-is value was $250,000. So 80% of $250,000 was $200,000. So I can literally buy this in the worst case scenario, buy this in private money and take it to an A lender and refinance it. My new mortgage will be greater than my purchase price. So that was my mentality at that time. So,
and what was the asking price on the
140?
You got it for 140. As is price was actually 250.
No, the as is value of which is still on the market.
Yeah. So why are you getting it for 140 then?
So my agent, who is the listing agent that I bought the first property, I gave him a lot of referrals, and during that summer of 2020, I told him, hey, like, I'm ready to get into this model. If you have anything that requires a lot of work, like, give it to me. And it was the same seller, and this property was full with tenants that were doing drugs, became a hoarder house. So I walked in, it was up and down duplex. So the seller didn't really want to put it on the market and kind of deal with it. So it was 2 duplexes. The other one, I was able to get it for $286,000, but the seller backed out last minute. They wanted to live in it. And the other one, it was whatever offer I was willing to give. So there was no asking price. I came in at $120,000, but they wanted $150,000, so I came in at $140,000. And I raised $150,000. So that summer, I went to my colleagues, my network, and I gave them the idea, hey, if I do come up with an opportunity, I'd be willing to, raise money with the right offer. And I did not want to give up equity. It was
just debt payment. Debt. Yeah, just promissory notes.
Yeah, so promissory note, $150,000 covered my purchase price, and the cash for keys of $5,000 and my closing cost.
All right, so you did the cash for keys, and then you went back to an A lender and
no. So what I did was, I had a $50,000 student line of credit. I used that for renovation. Plus, I borrowed a buddy of mine $50,000. So with the $150,000 and the private money that I borrowed was at 10% interest only payment. So my all-in capital that I borrowed was $250,000. So with the interest and holding costs was just under $260,000. The property was appraised 6 months later for $389,000. So
holy moly!
I took it to an A lender. My new mortgage was $311,000. Paid off the $260,000, and I made $50,000 in extra capital without using my own money.
Call that the perfect BRRRR.
Yeah, right. I wish you can get that now, but it's getting quite difficult.
I feel like you still can, but I don't know. Like, I've been generally pretty big on go where the deals make sense. I like what you did. You went to Windsor, deals made sense there.
Yeah.
So is Ontario sort of not really making sense to you anymore?
I think there are still opportunities in secondary and tertiary markets for just quick multifamily BRRRRs, like 2 to 4 units. After that property in Windsor, I went to Sudbury because I couldn't get qualified or not even be able to make a reasonable offer on property, because Windsor at that time, which I thought it was already at its peak, wasn't really at its peak. And I think everyone thought in Ontario, all the markets were at its peak. So I took the map and I was like, Sudbury seemed like the next reasonable city that hasn't been touched. And ever since then, all my properties have been in Sudbury. So as of right now, I have 10 or 11 properties in Sudbury.
And all multis?
All multis.
Okay. What's the average size of the multis?
Right now, probably on average 3 to 4 units. I have a 111 unit.
Okay.
That is a 4-plex, 5-plex, and a duplex on one lot. So
nice.
Under one mortgage. The beauty of that is when I'm renting it out, I'm not renting it as an 11-unit building. I'm renting it as a duplex or a 4-plex or a 5-plex. So the rents I'm able to achieve are higher. So I bought that last year for 1.3 million and just got appraised for just under 2.1.
Wow, prices in Sudbury are that high now?
Yeah, it is. So I guess since I'm on the commercial valuation side as my career, like I do a lot of appraisals for clients. So I have an idea in terms of, hey, if I'm using this cap rate for a client, I can kind of underwrite it to see what my projections would be.
That right there is such an asset. Like, just anyone listening to this, just think about that. If you're constantly looking at and appraising and like you're seeing comps, like, you know what stuff's trading at in that market based on like basically insider info.
Basically.
We don't have access to that same information that you have through your subscription service, right?
It's depending on the real estate brokerage you're with. It's a lot of money. So a lot of the institutional brokerages will fund the subscription. They'll take a portion of your commission to fund that on your admin.
Yeah.
But it is a competitive advantage over just a normal investor.
Do you have to disclose that you're a real estate appraiser when you buy stuff?
No, because I don't have my real estate license.
No, so, okay. I just wondered if it was a similar requirement for an appraiser.
So I can't appraise my own buildings. So what I do is that I kind of appraise it myself using the direct capitalization method. Yeah. And when I go approach that appraiser, I'm like, hey, this is how I underwrote
Hey, I've already done the whole thing for you.
So
no pressure.
Let me know if this is if this is the operating expenses or income ratio that you're going to be using. And I'll get a good idea if that's the appraiser I want to use. Yeah. Unfortunately, due to conflict of interest, my firm is not able to do that.
Well, you mean your own firm can't? Yeah, of course. Yeah. Those pesky conflicts of interest. For sure. Yeah, I mean, that's just such valuable information. So, I mean, especially on the BRRRR side, the refi side, when you see like other investors, what they're able to do, and then, you know what you're able to buy for. So then all of a sudden now, it just gives you that confidence to go ahead and pull the trigger and buy them.
Yeah, like I could put offers on, like within 5 minutes, like I can put an offer on a multifamily building under conditions. So at least I have some leeway to do further due diligence. But in terms of what the ARV would be, right now the tricky part is how financing works with the rate hikes. If you're going CMHC or you're going conventional on the refinance, what your LTV would be. Because getting a value is one thing, but getting your capital out is a whole nother ballgame.
Yeah, because it's all about what the bank will support from a debt coverage ratio.
For sure.
Higher interest rates means it's that much harder.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry, I'm just like almost yawning. My son wakes up at 5:30 every morning.
Yeah. Right.
If not earlier. Anyways. Okay, so I mean that's a super interesting approach that you're able to take with that. Sudbury's far. How are you managing with the distance?
So I grew up in Vaughan. So right now my parents are in Woodbridge. I just moved into downtown Toronto last year, but when I started investing in Sudbury, it's only about 3.5 hour drive to Sudbury from Vaughan, which is almost the same distance to Windsor. Yeah. So in the beginning when I was scaling, I was literally going to Sudbury once a month, twice a month, meeting tenants. I was doing all the leasing. It was not sustainable. But once I reached the 17 unit to 20 unit mark and I had another 11 units coming under contract, I just reached out to my network, posted on Kijiji for someone who's willing to manage my real estate portfolio in Sudbury. I did not want to outsource property management. I feel like the quality of the services kind of deteriorate. Yeah. Once you start outsourcing management.
I agree. Insource. So you more just hired an individual that would run around for you.
So they take care of leasing. There's no leasing costs. It's just on an hourly rate. So $20 an hour.
So you just pay this guy $20 an hour to go meet with people, everything.
Yeah. So she takes care of manages the renovation because contractors will renovate all the property depending on what
boots on the ground basically is what she does.
Yeah. And all maintenance. So I have a third-party property management software called Release. And that is where tenants can put in all their repairs and maintenance requests. and she'll get a notification on the app. I have the landlord app, so I don't really get the details. I just see what my rental income is on every property, and she gets all the maintenance requests. All the tenants can pay through the app. So I try systemizing it to the best of my ability.
Interesting. Okay, so somebody else is in a market like far from where they invest. What's the easiest way for them to find their boots on the ground, their in-sourced boots on the ground? Is it your network, or what if you don't have a network that has connections there?
I think the best way for me, when I went to Sudbury, nobody on social media that I was following or I heard of was investing in Sudbury from the GTA or publicizing it. So
Well, Austin though, right?
Austin went after I did.
Oh, okay. I thought he was.
So a couple of months afterwards.
Okay.
And Austin started promoting it on his social media, and then I was like, no way, because I was trying to keep it as discreet as possible until I get a couple of properties under my belt. But now, like, a lot of investors from Toronto are
that's
investing
crazy.
up north.
Well, like Robbie Clark and Dylan
Yeah,
Suter.
so they have a huge portfolio out there. His entire team, like Dylan Suter and all those guys. So they're quite well known up in Sudbury and all the northern tertiary markets like Sault Ste. Marie and whatnot.
Yeah.
But in regards to building a team, for me, when I went up, I just went to a property management company, and a lot of them have their own contracting team. So they did my first unit, but through that I met like 4 or 5 contractors, because I met a plumber, I met a handyman, and through those I reached out to their network.
Yeah.
And it takes time.
So it's just meeting people and asking questions. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes it is just time, as you've said.
Yeah. And I just stayed over in Sudbury at a hotel, spent a couple of nights there, did what I had to do, drive around. And it was, now looking back, it didn't seem like a grind, but that's the thing. Like, a lot of investors always come to me and be like, hey, like, how is that even possible? Like, that's so much energy for you to go back and forth. And I'm like, if you think the work is a grind, it's going to be a grind. But if you just put your mind to it and you look at what the potential would be, it's just more of a passion. It doesn't seem like that.
I used to enjoy it. I sleeping in the house, not showering more than like twice in a week.
I think you stayed over at your
I slept in the properties when there was not even vapor barrier. Like waking up with morning dew on my face. I didn't even mind it. I'm like, because this, to me, it was like things were finally changing for me, because I never really hit my stride with real estate. I never really had any significant success, and this was the boldest move I'd made to date.
Right.
And I just liked it. I'm like, I really felt willing to put in the work, and I didn't even mind it. And which I think that's similar for you, what you're describing.
People just see the end result and not all the work that went behind. But sometimes we get so caught up in acquisition. Like, I just got a property under contract yesterday, and I just got it, and I'm not even excited anymore. It's just more of like, all right, just send it to the lawyer and figure it out.
Eventually becomes tedious and monotonous, which I can relate to as well. Like, the minutia, I guess, on a daily basis, the people I have to pay, and it's like, it never goes away. Like, you got this, and then 100 more emails the next day. That stuff happens. Now, granted, like, I have a lot of people helping me out. But it's just, as you grow, like, you're constantly having to find new things to delegate, right?
Right. Yeah.
And as you're growing your portfolio, you're probably going to get more and more things come up and have to deal with.
I think for me, it's more of getting a full-time staff or part-time staff, kind of doing a lot of the, financing, the documentation process. Right now, I still have to do it. I do have a VA, but it's different having someone in a different country, where someone on the ground, boots on the ground, where they can do the underwriting for properties. They can do all the negotiations. So you want to send somebody out to actually look at them, run through everything. So the current lady you have working for you, you don't think she could do that stuff? So right now, when I get a property under contract, or like a deal on MLS, like, I'll just get it under contract. She'll go do their due diligence with my contractors. I'll get the video, so it's a bit more virtual. And once I feel like the numbers are quite good, I get the appraisal back, everything is solid, then I will make the trip out to Sudbury. So right now, I don't really go unless I have a lot of clients who have to appraise their properties. So a lot of my clients, they do invest in Northern Ontario, so like in North Bay and Sudbury. So when I do the drive up to appraise my properties, clients' properties, then I'll take a couple of hours out of the day to go visit mine and see what those projects are. So that's the beauty of what I do. I get to travel across Ontario. So I was just near Montreal on Friday. So I went to Cornwall, Hawkesbury, and a few other cities along the way, and I just get to go to cities that I would never really take the time out of my own day to go visit, and I'll just it's such valuable experience. A lot of people would ask me early on when I was doing the podcast, like, should I become a realtor, appraiser? I'm like, you know what, you get into any of these professions that real estate related or adjacent or actually directly involved, like,
you're just going to learn, and you're going to use those skills. I was just talking to a guy who's an urban planner, and he just bought a property with my brother-in-law, and it's just crazy, like the confidence he had because he's an urban planner. Like I know what I can do here.
And
it helps.
I'm sure they probably look at the gentrification, what the potential of it in terms of the long run. I think urban planning, being a commercial appraiser, maybe other profession within the real estate community, they require the most education.
They do,
compared to getting a mortgage license.
Yeah, like you need an actual university degree to be a commercial appraiser, right?
Yes, so you got to get a degree, and then you got to go to the UBC, University of British Columbia, which is online, and they have an affiliated program with the Appraisal Institute of Canada. So you're doing courses at the university, and you got to do credits with the Institute of Canada. So it can take about 2 to 4 years. So right now, for myself, I'm still an AIC candidate, which means that I have the right to practice, but I'm not an official commercial appraiser, because during the pandemic, I thought I was going to leave my job by the end of the year at the rate I was growing. And I'm like, you know what, let me build something out of this with the portfolio that I was doing. And once the pandemic closed off and I was going to a lot of these local meetups, rarely you ever walk into a room and meet another appraiser. Like I told someone, hey, I'm a commercial appraiser. You get like 5 people around you. Right. So there was so much value that I was able to add in a room. And I'm like, I can make a business out of this, because for me, I am commission based. So it's all about the revenue you bring in. So it's not like I'm working 9 to 5. I get to do whatever I want, but as long as I'm bringing constant revenue and I have my team working on the reports.
So do you, so you have to appraise them yourself though?
So I do the valuation.
I
do the client meeting, the business development, kind of looking at the property. But a lot of the appraisal report, when you're looking at the economic overviews, a lot of the property details, you can get, we have our own team that supports us. So we've trained them well how to do that, like pulling the geo warehouse, the MPAC. There's CoStar data, RealNet data. I look at the comps. But here's the thing: once you have a lot of data within a city and you're doing a couple of multifamily buildings, it's pretty much the same comps, right? Because there's only so much commercial transactions that happen, especially with office, retail, industrial. So once you have a good database, it's all just replicating that information, ensuring that the data is as concrete as possible, so you can continue to replicate it and make a machine out of it. So you're bringing in as much revenue. So we're trying to bring in about 75,000 to 100,000 a month in revenue. The most I bought a month is probably 100,000, 105,000.
You brought in 100,000 in appraisal revenue.
So, but to get that much in 1 month is more portfolio appraisals, where you're getting a lot of clients who have multiple properties in Ontario.
And for those who haven't bought commercial yet, it's much bigger appraisal, much more expensive. A lot more detail,
for sure.
And a lot you can learn from those reports. So these are worth reading through.
I think everyone just gets to the value and they're like, all right.
No, you do. There's a lot of answers in those. It's really cool to actually take a look through them. All the information compiled in one spot. So talk me through your process, just to help people understand what goes into one of these reports, and how, because it does seem quite subjective sometimes to come up with values. Obviously, different appraisers are going to disagree on what something's worth. I mean, how are you putting it together? I know you're going to say comps. What special data do you have access to that allows you to really have confidence in the values you're coming up with?
So depending on the firm you're with, a lot of the institutional firms have a technology team focused on systemizing a lot of the valuations. So for myself, I'm part of a global real estate brokerage firm. So we're based out of the US, and they put a lot of investment into AI, right? Because a lot of our institutional clients, especially the REITs, they want to be able to get a value as soon as possible. And that's where the market is going, where 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, you would have to wait a month to get an appraisal report, especially on the commercial side. Whereas right now, I can give you a value depending on the fee you're willing to pay within 2 days to 5 days, right? Because they focus so much on the technology that once we put in the data into our system, for instance, in multifamily, it's really your income and expenses. And depending on what you're trying to do with the building, so a lot of our clients are basically BRRRing that building. So depending on the lender, you may need 2 values. So a hypothetical market value as renovated and stabilized, and an as is value. So the hypothetical is just basically for the lender to know there is enough juice in the deal, or for the actual client, just to know that they're a bit more comfortable with the deal that they're going to be pursuing and investing a lot of capital. So for us, we look at both. So the client will provide their pro forma,
Yeah.
and in terms of what they're projecting to
Do you use the client's assumptions for expenses, or you have your own?
So property taxes, insurance are they're more fixed. So if the property taxes are amount, like we're going to use that. Insurance, that we kind of look at what the client has. There's a good range that we
like an allowable range that you'll work with.
Yeah. So we just had a client that had a multifamily building, and his annual property insurance was less than $1,000 a year for like an 8-unit building.
That doesn't make sense.
Obviously. But that's what the insurance was with TD, and TD is pretty cheap when it comes to property insurance.
Huh.
And but for us, if we were to use that client's property insurance, well, then the cap rates of the comps are going to be adjusted.
It's going to skew your value. Yeah.
So we just put in the industry standards for what we see. And then repairs and maintenance are typically $750 a unit. Utility, depending on if it's all inclusive.
So do you kind of stick with what the CMHC guidelines are, like what they use for their programs?
We try to be as consistent as possible, but every lender will have their own underwriting.
Sure, the lenders do, but if they're using CMHC, they're all going to use CMHC's guidelines too, right?
So the hardest part for us is we have to use consistent operating expenses, because if not all clients will be using CMHC. Yeah. So we don't want our operating expenses to be based on what lender you're using. Yeah. Because the NOI does not take.
So you just stay consistent. Yeah. And do you have some degree of certainty that what you're doing is what other appraisers are doing to keep your cap rates consistent?
So a lot of appraisers don't have some additional operating expenses that they use. So payroll and benefits typically is about $500 a unit. For us, for the way I look at it, a building, if you have a 10-unit building, a payroll and benefits is a huge operating expense to add for a very small multi-family.
Yeah, you don't necessarily use that for a small building. Yeah,
maybe more than 20 units, 30 units, depending on where it's located in the building. But some appraisers may use that for a 5-unit building. So I had an appraiser who appraised my 5-unit building, and he used payroll and benefits at about $500 a unit, and that's a huge amount of money.
Yeah, it affects your numbers. Yeah.
So it's important to have that conversation to see what the appraiser will use. So depending on the lender, they may add that payroll and benefits when they do their own underwriting. But a lot of lenders, they don't really use the NOI that we come up with. They just want to make sure the value is there, and they kind of come up with their own NOI, and they debt service.
Right. Well, that's been my experience with commercial appraisers. You know, they don't really so much care what I have to say my expenses are. Like, they're coming up with their own. You know, so it's really more like, what is the revenue and how is it derived, and all that stuff. What do you find clients that you work with? And I think this is a special opportunity because you come out to the meetups, like you're very integrated with the investor community. What do you find you're teaching people a lot? Like what's a big teaching point that, people are like, aha, I didn't know that.
I think it's cap rates.
Yeah.
People always ask me, hey, Myron, what is the cap rate of like London or Kitchener-Waterloo? And for me, it really comes down to what your NOI is, right? Because a cap rate, I can give you a cap rate between a 2% spectrum from like 3 to 5%, but that's a huge difference in value. So for me, it's kind of showing them that, hey, your cap rate is based on the net operating income of the building, because typically the lower your NOI, the lower your cap rate, the higher the NOI, the higher the cap rate, because properties typically are supposed to transact that the less room to add value to a building, the higher the cap rate due to the limited potential of value.
Yeah, so you're saying that if there's more opportunity to add value, it's going to trade at
a lower cap rate.
Yeah,
and there are deals where individuals are able to get a vacant unit on possession. So for me, when I did my 11 units, I bought it at a low 5% cap, but I got a couple of units vacant prior to closing.
And that was, so the vacancies were included in the cap rate. So the cap rate basically had some vacancy, which really skews it.
Yeah.
And right? Or do you run the numbers based on full occupancy at market rent, and then you just have a higher vacancy rate? Like how would most appraisers?
We look at the contract, and then we take, at the time of the inspection, we look at how many vacant units there are.
Yeah.
But let's say on paper or on the agreement of purchase and sale, if this is under contract, there is an agreed upon vacancy that will be available at the time of closing, then we will take that into consideration, and then we'll add an assumption in our report saying that the value is based on
re-renting these units
being vacant. And then we, just so that we're protected from a value side, and the lender knows that. Hey,
Yeah, and I feel like the lenders even will take a similar approach. Like they know you're going to rent the stuff out. They're going to apply their vacancy rate that they feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
And probably treat it as occupied.
But I had an interesting experience when I did the 11 unit. I had, ideally, the more vacant units you have on closing, the better is for the lender.
Better for you, worse for the bank.
Yes. So I assumed that it would be better for the lender too, because they're getting a higher income to service a debt that they've secured.
Well, after you turn them over. But I feel like your big 5 banks don't like that, generally speaking. Credit unions, I think, have way more vision for that.
So the credit union that I did, they put a $65,000 mortgage holdback because I had 5 vacant units on closing.
So they didn't like it either.
So I had to put $65,000 of my own money for a down payment. And the weird part is that they don't even ask if you actually renovate it and rent it. They just need 5 lease agreements to be like, hey, like you rented these out. So for me, it was like really redundant, because that money I could have just used for the actual renovation. So it kind of delayed the process in terms of the capital I was willing to invest in, and I had to shift my money around. So for me, in my investment journey, it kind of helps out, because from the appraisal side of things, I can kind of add that benefit to the client to be like, hey, in addition to me valuing the property, just keep an eye out from the financing side. This may or may not happen. Yeah,
I mean, there's no question that you're obviously going to be very helpful for people who, are investors like-minded. Like you have such an advantage over an appraiser that does your same job that doesn't invest themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
And how could you not? Like if you're an appraiser, like valuing these buildings, seeing what they can do. I guess maybe it's the new generation of it now, because they actually don't look like they're that profitable anymore. Like Ontario real estate's so inflated. It is what it is. But
agreed.
You have an interesting advantage though, for sure. What else any other teachable stuff? Like, I mean, what you said about the cap rates, I agree with that. I think a lot of people who are in our space intuitively knew that anyway. Like, it's almost more of a price per unit. Like there was a price per unit in certain areas where there was X potential to add value. So if there's lots of, then people were paying absurd price per units for stuff that needed work.
So for me, I kind of look at price per unit. If I'm looking at a deal that I want to purchase on the MLS or private, the first question I ask is what's the price per unit that they're asking, before I spend like 10 minutes trying to do all the income.
That's the easiest thing, because I've heard, talking to Jake, he'll just say some appraisers, it doesn't matter. Like there's a certain price per unit that they're not going to go over. Like, yes, it's about the cap rate up to this price per unit, and then we're not going higher than that.
So because on the commercial side, if it's an income generating asset, the property is appraised with the primary valuation method using the income approach. And then the secondary valuation method is the sale comparison approach. So when we do the comparisons, we're looking at it from an NOI per unit for every comp. And if the comparable is, let's say in Toronto, so we're appraising something in Hamilton and we're using a comp from Toronto or like the GTA, and the property in Hamilton is at a greater price per unit than the one we're at Toronto at the same, after the adjustment, then something is not correct, because the data has to be correlated. And this is ensuring that the property is like comparable from a Class C multifamily building and based on the quality of the building. So the price per unit is just to make sure that data is not skewed from the cap rate side, and making sure that the appraisers are kind of in line with where the market should be from a price per unit. But if the quality of the units is superior, so a property that is leased with plus utilities, so tenants are paying for all utilities, that's a low risk to the landlord. So cap rates also determine the risk factor associated with the property. It's the same thing buying a stock. Like the higher the rewards, the higher the risk.
Right.
Same thing with, that's what people go to as secondary tertiary market, is a slightly higher cap rate, but people invest in Toronto.
But a little bit more risk. Yeah. Perceived risk. I guess in a sense, a smaller market's more volatile to industry changes. Sure. Like if one employer moves out, that has an effect on that market. Whereas if one employer moves out of Toronto, it's not felt. Yeah, because generally
nobody invests in Toronto that I know of for cash flow. They just buy based on potential, and it's strictly based on location and where population is.
Wild. And there's a place for that. Like there is. I just feel like a lot of people who do it probably shouldn't. There's a certain type of people that should do it. But I think a lot that probably shouldn't do.
I think I I don't think I would park my money in Toronto yet, but let's say in 10 years, 15 years down the road.
Yeah, if it represents this amount of this portfolio, then that's cool. Yeah.
It's like more of like pocket money or pocket change that you're willing to park in just for the future generation.
And you know that they're likely it's going up in a big way, right?
For sure. So I live in downtown Toronto right now, and I choose to rent. I'm living with a roommate. My rent is about $1,600 a month.
That's awesome.
All my friends and family, or even friends, they're like, "How could you you have all these investments, but you're still choosing to rent?" I'm like, "Well, the opportunity cost for me to buy that condo, I could get a greater return that will offset my rent."
That's what I did for like my whole 20s, man. Like it was just easier to get mortgages. There was so many reasons to do it, and I didn't like the price points in Burlington, so I just like, whatever. Just live with family basically, and that allowed me to get lots of mortgages.
For sure.
Yeah. So I mean, it's about taking your advantages. I think that's wise.
Yeah, and that's the other thing with the generation. So I'm in my mid to late 20s, and you probably see online where a lot of news reports says that in order to buy a property in the Greater Toronto area, you need like a $200,000 salary, like 150 minimum, and people are buying into that because that's what the paper says and that's what they're going to choose to believe in. But if you really take the time to put yourself into a lot of these real estate meetups or just education, the rental income can offset a lot of what you can qualify for, right? So for me, when I started my career, like I was only making around $50,000 because I'm commission based too. So banks don't really take in your commission for the first 2 years.
Yeah.
So for me, I still was able to get, I think, $1.5 or $2 million in mortgages with A lenders.
Because it's commercial, right?
No, a lot of residential. So with one of the A lenders.
Oh, okay. Because of what it could generate?
So in Sudbury, I was being able to get, like, one of my mortgages was like $1,500 a month, and my rental income was like $4,700 a month.
The Sudbury effect right there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was able to scale a lot. Yeah. I wouldn't be able to do that maybe slightly in Windsor, but not like in London, Hamilton, because the income to debt ratio would not have made sense.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point you're making there, right? If you go to a market like Sudbury, if the rents justify it, the banks are all of a sudden willing to lend. Yeah. What are your thoughts on, and obviously you're so set up here in Ontario, so I get, why it might persuade you to say one thing over another here, but what are your thoughts on US or going to a different market?
I think in the US, depending on where you are, I think it's great, but depending on where you're going to be investing in the States, you might as well just invest in Saskatchewan, or
you could do that,
Manitoba, or even Alberta.
Yeah.
Because Alberta is still landlord friendly and some of the prairies are still landlord friendly, that it's much easier qualifying for those mortgages from what I understand.
With the Canadian banks and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think in the US, it really comes down to where you're located specifically. I know you're in Florida. For me, with my limited knowledge and my exposure with trying to start investing in the US, I think my mind is so focused on the team that I already have.
Yeah.
That I'm not willing to just
go to a
shift
new market.
my energy.
That's how I was with London. I did not want to leave, like go start from scratch. It just seems daunting. Once you put all that work in to a market, it's just like, oh, do I really want to do that all over again?
Because you can look at a deal, I'm sure right now, like let's say you find a deal in London, all you need is your phone, and you have your network in London to do the rest for you.
Yeah, right. People who can help.
So for me, it's more of like, do I really want to put the time and energy? But I think once it'll come to a point where it'll make sense. But for me, I did look into a vacation home in Orlando. I went on a radio show in Orlando last April, and the agent that I met, he kind of gave me an idea on vacation homes around Disney. And it was pretty cool, like $1 million for an 8-bedroom house within a gated community. So they'll kind of take care of everything. I think it was a 15% management fee, but you basically get a pool, 8-bedroom, Disney like branded in terms of the room.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty cool lifestyle. I can imagine myself, or the future that I would want to have to be able to come down. But I do think for me the biggest thing with Florida is just the weather. I'm sure you've already experienced that, but
it's awesome weather.
I don't know. It's great weather, but there's also like the hurricanes and the tropical season. That's the biggest thing I'm worried about. With
I was in the eye. So my properties were in the eye of the hurricane.
Really?
Yeah. Like the worst hurricane that Cape Coral's seen. And they survived. So
yeah.
But I mean, lots didn't, right? But mine being new construction, the way they're built, they just not even any cracked glass on mine. Whereas other people had, they had to rip out all their walls.
But I guess
Yeah.
that's the same thing saying like an earthquake can happen in the
Yeah.
GTA, and anything you have can.
Sure. I
Right.
mean, at the end of the day, like building standards in Florida have been adjusted to adjust for that, right? So if you're getting into older product, yeah, you could get hammered, and I wouldn't even want to. Like the realtor I've been working with, he's saying, yeah, we can pick up some deals. I'm like, yeah, but what if another hurricane hits? Like, I don't want to own that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, technically you could pay the insurance, but
Right.
Part of the issue is that insurance companies are going bankrupt because of the number of claims.
Right.
Similar to what happened in Alberta many years back with the floods they had there.
So I'm actually curious how insurance underwriting works in those kind of markets, because they probably have to invest that money into like high rate of return to be able to.
Yeah. I'm curious what they invested in, but it's not cheap. Like insurance policy on the larger one I'm selling right now, $7,000 a year.
Just a single family.
And that's not even including hurricane insurance, like flood insurance. It's not, they don't call it hurricane, it's flood, and then you can get other stuff. But the flood insurance, if I wanted it on that one, it probably wouldn't be that bad because of the way it's built. But other people are paying like $9-10 grand a year for flood insurance.
So do you feel like that's why properties are slightly more cheaper due to the cost of holding?
Some of that stuff, yeah, for sure. But I could hang on to these without flood insurance because they're literally built right out of the floodplain.
Right.
Like if they didn't flood on this hurricane, I'm not worried.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's all about the how, right? Yeah. But I don't even think it's just that market. Like I think Florida's good for like a flipping market, an Airbnb market. Less good for a long-term hold market, unless you're gonna, Airbnb it. But I like better contingency plans than that. So, I think there's a lot of other states though that work well too. I'm kind of just exploring some options now.
Yeah, I know there's Scottsdale, Arizona. A lot of people are going down there. For me, I think I'm not sure if you were a fan of Scottsdale, Arizona.
Well, I have never been to Arizona myself, but I do know people who invest there, and Arizona just seems awesome. Yeah. I'd love to go one day.
But every state that I've visited, so I went to California, San Diego specifically, I've always took the time to go visit like condominiums or any properties. Mm-hmm. And I was in just south of Los Angeles, Newport Beach.
I've been there.
Man, like homes were transacting at just a single family home like $3.5 million to $4 million.
It's wild, huh?
That's what it was, and people are willing to pay. So when I look at Toronto,
it's still cheap relatively.
There, you don't think it's overpriced. It's just it's just what you have to pay to have a normal.
Well, Toronto's still cheap compared to New York. Sure. There are always going to be, I shouldn't say always, but there will most likely continue to be other cities that are much more expensive per square foot, et cetera. Yeah. However, I think that where Toronto fails is where when you compare income to housing prices. Agreed. I've seen that somewhere, and I think it's among one of the most expensive places in the world relative to income.
And I think the new generation coming out of school, college, like in the mid-20s, early 30s, they're still accustomed to the idea of buying your primary home as your first piece of quote unquote investment, because everyone in their circle of friends and family are doing it, and they feel like that's what they have to do to be a part of the normal society.
Yeah, fitting in and keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, right. So for me, it's like if you're married and you only have yourself and your partner, and your goal is to travel. Like for me, like once I get married, I do want to spend the first couple of years traveling. I don't really need to be paying a $4,000 or $5,000 mortgage when I'm not going to really be spending the full year there.
I thought very similarly, yeah.
Right. So for me, I'm trying to using my social media to kind of educate people and change that mentality, because it's a lot of people want to buy that first home because they want to start a family and spend more time with their kids. But a lot of the people that I've been meeting in their early 40s are actually getting to real estate investing because they don't have enough time to spend with their kids, and they don't want to take up a new promotion because getting a new job just means more time, more work, right? So I think sooner or later, a lot of people will just have to start renting. But just because you rent doesn't mean you can't buy something.
Own assets. Yeah, I mean, I'm big on that. Like, I don't need to invest here in Ontario just because I live here. Right. Even that, angle. Like, you could own absolutely nothing here and invest somewhere else, or you could not own your home here and have all your investments here.
Agreed.
Which I've done sort of, basically both those models. And it's really just about making sense. For me, things needed to make sense. Like if I couldn't make sense of the plan, I wouldn't do it. I could never make sense of just working a job because to me, that never made sense. Like my parents would say, oh, go to school, get a good education, go get a good job. What's a good job? one that makes me happy? Nah, don't be silly. One that'll get you a good pension, a good retirement. It just, and I think a lot of kids kind of feel that way coming out of high school. Like,
Right.
oh, I don't know what I want to do. I'm sure you felt that way. And
Yeah, like I graduated and got my first paycheck, and I was like, what am I gonna really do with this? Like,
yeah, didn't know
I
what
gotta
to
work
do.
another 2 weeks to get my next check.
Oh, I know. I felt so lost with all that. Like when I was teaching at Western, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I graduated from business school, didn't know what I wanted to do. Everyone I was graduating with was just getting like consulting jobs, accounting jobs, iBanking jobs.
Right.
I wasn't into any of that stuff,
And
and I couldn't make sense of it. So I went and taught because that was fun. It was like extending university by 2 years.
right.
And but fortunately, I met my wife, now wife, and her mom was into real estate investing, and I was just like, imagine just having one connection that we have at a meetup or something, like just
Right.
one person that's doing it. I knew nobody that was doing it.
For sure.
And then it's easy to take it for granted now. I'll go out to the meetup next week, and there might be 80 people there that are all investing in real estate. That's what really made all the difference. But it helped me to see, long-winded story, helped me to see that there actually is an angle. There is a way that you can do your day-to-day and have things actually make sense.
Right.
And I think some people just think, it just won't make sense. You just got to keep your head down, work hard, and things will happen.
And I think it really comes down to when that individual, or even myself, like for me, when it came down to what is my value on time,
Mhm.
because our parent generation or immigrants coming in, it's not about time, it's more about supporting the kids. But then for us coming up, like we had the flexibility where we can determine what the value of our own time is. And it's a very subjective figure depending on who that person is. But for me, I feel like a career where you can choose your own time, you'll be able to bring in revenue and build a team out of it. And not all careers you can do that. Some of you have to be behind the computer. But for me, like the firm that I'm working for, they spent a lot of time and investments into technology where like it doesn't really require me to be at the desk. So right now, before I came, I just took an hour and just made sure that everyone knew what they had to do, and I'm here. But at least the revenue is still being generated and meeting that timeline for that client. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to streamline it. I think being a doctor is very difficult. You can't really streamline
Yeah, if
that.
you're in those professions, then your active brings you in quite a bit of money, and you just got to you pretty much got to work it really well, build up that nest egg, and then eventually you replace that income. And it's everyone's decision, right? Like how many people do you know that have quit a job they went and got a lot of education for?
Yeah, it is.
And they just quit it because their real estate makes them so much money.
So my roommate is he's a doctor, and he'll be on call for like 24, 48 hours. So it's funny because like he'll leave by the time I wake up, and then he'll be in bed because he can't really go out or drink or anything because he has to be ready for the next day and be focused. Whereas like I'll come home, and when I come home, he's already in bed. And I told him like I could never do this lifestyle if I had to. And don't get me wrong, giving back. I mean, obviously public health is an amazing thing. Like we need doctors, but for me as an individual, I think I'm so used to living on my own terms that I can't restrict the day-to-day life just for my career.
Is this a generational thing though? Like, is this like a common sentiment now? I don't even know.
Yeah.
Like, are more people like that? Like, I feel like the newer generations, like,
I think social media plays a big role.
They wanted. I think, are people becoming more entrepreneurial? At least to a little bit of a degree. Like they think, oh, I could become the next YouTube sensation or something like that.
I think social media for sure. Because then when I was in high school, I'm sure even when you were in high school, like Facebook just came out when I was in grade 8, grade 9. But Instagram when I went to university, and I'm sure you were already like past the education standpoint. So for me, like I don't have a lot of networks with the high school and elementary school friends that I have because we just didn't have a platform. Like MSN was what we used back in the day, but God knows like where that is
Remember
right
ICQ?
now. No, that was too far me. I have no idea what that is.
Dating myself here. Yeah, that was like before MSN was ICQ.
Interesting. Yeah, so a lot of those connections like we don't have where a lot of the upcoming generation they do, and they're able to sustain that relationship and network through social media. And I feel like if they follow the right people, they have they're way ahead of the game than what we are and what we were exposed to. Because for me, I think once the pandemic hit, everyone became an investor on social media. Like every week and every month, there was a lot of people, and that's where I got exposed to it because I was like, shoot, there's so many investors.
So really, it was the lockdowns. That's when you started looking, or you were in 2019.
2019 October, but then I went to a Keyspire event in February, and that's where Darren Burrows was speaking, and that's where I met him for the first time. I know he was a guest with you a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, shoot, like there's so many ways to invest in real estate. I didn't really know what the BRRRR was. I thought it was just buy and hold, and I started just following the right people, and at that time I didn't really know who the right people were.
I was probably at that event. Were you at the summit, or was it?
No, it was just like the 3 day
the 3 day workshop. Yeah, okay.
Right. And then there was a lot of free online webinars.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I just started putting offers, even though I had no money in my bank account. I'm like, I'm just gonna figure a way. And eventually, I figured out how to roll the money multiple times and getting a lot of seller financing. So half my portfolio was vendor take back mortgages in second position. So I rarely ever had to put 20 or 25% down.
I'm doing one of those right now. VTB in second position with the seller.
Yeah.
That's the way. That's a good way of doing it.
You don't really have to get it. And I thought, and in the beginning when I was offering on those VTBs, like I didn't really know first position, second position, because I didn't know how the underwriting and lending works. But I just assumed.
Well, the underwriting, they're not going to like it. If you're closing privately, then it can work. Which, I mean, this is where I'm at with all this. Like I just rather deal with private money. And this is what I like about the States, is because there's just like, if we have a lot of private lenders here, they have like times 10. It's just like insane. Now, granted, there's a variance in professionalism, which I've noticed. It is kind of the Wild West, and I don't like some of the way that they talk to me. I'm not desperate. I will find an alternative. Don't talk to me like that. But anyways, yeah, so it's an interesting landscape. But, you know, my thought with that is you can do that creative financing stuff.
Right.
Like, you know, there's just way more opportunity when you deal private, which obviously you've seen with your creative offers.
Yeah. So a lot of those work with credit unions.
The credit unions would allow for it?
So Desjardins, they're pretty big in Ontario.
But they want your DCR to work with the second. Yeah. So as long, Sudbury, it would work, right?
Yeah, of course. So
yeah, because your cash
duplex.
Yeah.
Where I only put 34,000 down, and on the commercial side, so they go up to like 12.7. I don't know why I've been told 12.7% is the maximum second position mortgage you can get on VTB, and that's what
That's very random. That must be something to do with your specific deal.
So on the 11, I know it was like on a previous deal. So when I got the 11 unit on my offer, it was like 12.7% of the mortgage. Of the purchase price will be in second position mortgage.
What?
And my agent was like, why 12.7? Why don't you just go to 13? I'm like, I'm not going to lose a deal just over a 0.03 with the lender.
Yeah.
I just capped it at 12.7.
Nice. Well, you want that zero down if you can get it. Maybe cash back. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I don't really know how that works, because some lawyers said that it's very difficult to have that on the actual agreement of purchase and sale, because lenders don't like that too, but I'm not sure.
So Carmen did it in the US on her Naples place, and she I don't think she'd mind me sharing this. So anyway, she bought the place for like $700, I think. And then, you know, it wasn't a firm offer. So she ended up doing her due diligence. And in the offer, she had already written in a dollar amount VTB. Like the seller agrees to this dollar amount VTB. And that would have been like, she would have been in for basically nothing, or like, I don't know, 20 grand or whatever. I don't know exactly how all the numbers worked, but I know she said she got like something like $40,000 back after she renegotiated the price after she did her due diligence. So I found this, and this. We're going to need to get it at this price. They agreed to that price, but they never adjusted the VTB. So she got cash back on closing.
That is crazy. Could that work here? I don't know.
I think so. 100%. Yeah. So you just write it in as a dollar rather than a percentage. Right. We tried. I was thinking about this as we were writing this on this resort we just bought. And the seller literally was wise to it and said, no, I want a cap. But I think we wrote it in a way that he had a chance to take it to his lawyer. So, you know, once you allow anything to go to a lawyer, no offense to lawyers, I know there's a reason for you. It's just, lawyers tend to convince people not to do things.
Yeah. And I think the one thing I learned in the beginning is never email your lawyer if you have a thing that could be a red flag. Like, always just pick up the phone and do everything.
Especially if they're representing the lender too.
Yeah. Right. So so for me, I always pick up the call, because there's questions that I just don't know if they follow within the guidelines or not. So and they're not going to respond to you on an email because it's just going to be documented. So you rather just pick up the phone and figure out the information.
Valid point. I mean, technically, if the lawyer hears it, they're supposed to tell the lender as well. But I'm not going to say anything more on that. Not saying I know of anybody who's done that. But okay, yeah, this is It's a cool discussion. I mean, we got into a lot of nuts and bolts, a lot of process with the appraisers, appraisals. I'll make an observation about you and what I think has worked for you. And I think it's reps. I think it's the number of reps. I think you probably analyze a lot of deals. I think that you've made a lot of calls and made a lot of offers.
Yeah.
And if you make enough offers, eventually somebody says yes.
Yeah.
To what your terms are, to what you want to get.
For me, yeah, I just put an offer out there if it makes sense to me. If I don't get it, I just don't get it.
Like somebody listening to this with absolutely no money could start doing the research, find a place that works, go make an offer, put the deposit on a credit card. And I am not giving advice. This is not advice. But negotiate a full 100% VTB or even a cash back.
Right.
That deal is out there.
Yeah.
But it takes educated eyes to see it.
And sometimes you just need to get the property under contract just to get that initial due diligence with that seller. Because a lot of sellers, they're very hard to deal with until
you're in due diligence. Here's the reason for that, my estimation.
Right.
They're invested in you once they allow the property to sit off market or under your contract for 30 days, they're now invested in you buying that deal.
Yeah. Like
they've invested time into you. So they're more likely to negotiate with you after 30 days than they are at the onset before you have anything in paper.
For sure.
That's my thought.
And
so,
even the 11 unit, it was on the market for 1.4 and I wanted at 1.1, but they weren't willing to go that low. So I realized they had a triplex on the market as well for 389, and I walked in and it said it was fully occupied, but there were 2 vacant units. So I put an offer for 300,000 on the triplex, and then put an offer on the 11 units. And on the 11 units, I said this offer is conditional upon the triplex being accepted.
Take it or leave it, yeah. Taking them all.
And they accepted the triplex for 300,000, and I got the 11 units for 1.3. And the triplex was appraised 3 months later with only 40,000 renovations for 650,000.
Wow.
So I cashed out 274, and I bought the 11 units with only $160,000 down payment.
So did the seller just grossly undervalue their property, or you just were a convenient option?
So they, number one, the property was listed under commercial other, not commercial multifamily, so it didn't really get the demand they wanted. Number two, the income and expenses were all over the place. So even me, when I looked at it, like the data was just off, that I just started asking a lot of questions and I knew the information wasn't correct. So for me, I just kind of used that to my advantage. And it came to a point where they just wanted to sell. It's been on the market for 4 months. And yeah, so like I literally bought 11 units with only a $60,000 down payment, because all I did was bought the triplex for 20% down, which is 60,000, and pulled 274,000, put 160, and then I bought a fourplex. I literally closed on the 11 units on a Friday, and I bought another fourplex with another VTB on a Monday.
Yeah. So how much money were you in across all of those ballpark? Like out of your pocket?
Zero.
So you just worked it out with the creative financing?
Yeah, because like for me to buy the duplex. So even a couple of months ago, before that, around the same time, October 2021, I bought a vacant turnkey fiveplex in Sudbury off market, and for 450,000. I negotiated at 11% VTB, so I only had to put 14% down. And once the first rate hike went up, it got appraised in December, so 2 months later, for 715. And once the first rate hike went up, I was like, you know what? For me, it's not about the number of units, it's more about the quality of the units and the quality of the building. And it was the worst one I had, so I sold it off market for 790. So I cashed out just around 300 grand, probably a bit more before taxes. And so for me, it was keeping a balance between cash, and even on my social media, like I just have something that says stay liquid and improvise. Because the more liquid you are and the more cash you can show to the bank, you don't really need to use that cash to buy the deal.
Yeah, just have it. Yeah, that was always an asset to me. I to this day, like I always like to have extra cash, even though I'm paying for private money. Like I'll still have cash just because I know it's essential.
For sure. So that's why I tell a lot of people, like money. A lot of people look at money as an obstacle. For me, it's more of an opportunity, where if a deal makes sense and there's an opportunity there, don't let an item like money, even though it seems like the big obstacle that you have to overcome, to be something that you're not willing to pursue. Just get that opportunity under contract. And for me, I tried going in without no JV partner. So far, it has worked. But if you do need to bring a partner and that's the route you have to go, like you can always show the potential in a deal and you can always raise capital.
Yeah, for sure. Any closing thoughts? We're coming up on the hour mark here. it's not something you want to share, words of wisdom. I mean, you just gave a bunch, so no pressure.
I think in terms of growing your real estate, trying to find what your purpose in terms of why you're buying real estate. Some people just buy for the sake of just getting their first property, but there's no exit strategy. And really talk with an appraiser. If you're in the commercial standpoint, have a commercial appraiser on your power team, because everyone has a mortgage agent and a real estate agent. But if you have an actual commercial appraiser where you can pick up the phone and be like, hey, like, what was the last thing you've appraised in a city? Like, what cap rate did you use? And I've done that to a lot of my clients. I'm like, hey, I just appraised one at a 6 cap, and this was the NOI. I'm not going to share the building. I'll share the number of units. But I think with the appraisal side of the business, with the Appraisal Institute of Canada, we can share what properties we're appraising. I still don't know why. Like real estate agents, mortgage agents, you can publicize that data in terms of the property you funded on or the property you transacted on. But the appraisal side, we can't really share that. So for me, I'm more than happy to share that. So find an appraiser that you could use. It can be on the residential side as well, but residential side is not a relationship-based industry.
No.
A commercial side, if you're on an institutional form, is more from a one-on-one relationship standpoint. So I think spend the time and your energy on finding a good appraiser that you can add on your power team.
Yeah, that's valuable information. And, same idea with like a commercial realtor. Like a really good commercial realtor is going to know those appraisers and, can connect you. And then, of course, if you, like you deal, where's your locations? Like, are you Ontario exclusively?
No. So I just did two in British Columbia last month. I did 2 in Alberta, and I just did one in Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
So you're across Canada.
So we do across Canada, New Brunswick. I just did one last week in Montreal. Now it's for us, that's our competitive advantage, that if you're dealing with me, like it doesn't matter where you are in Canada, you can deal with that. So we do it with a lot of like banks within the US as well. So a lot of the big institutionalized product assets like retail, mixed use, industrial, a lot of the major banks in the US are lending on it, not Canadian banks. So our US guys, they would send us the information and, hey, like these are our clients, could you take it on? And then we'll just pay a referral fee or whatever discussion that we've been able to do with them. Nice.
Interesting. Okay. So how do people follow you or reach you?
Instagram is probably the best way. Myron C, MYURENC. And through that, there's a link where you can book a consult call for commercial appraisals. A lot of people book that for a coaching call, and I'm like, hey, like I can't be a coach telling you it's a good deal and giving you my expert advice, because it's more of a conflict of interest. So strictly for that, and to follow my journey, I share a lot about my own real estate journey, because I can talk about the valuations on mine because it's my own property, not the client's. So I kind of run down the numbers with those and kind of share those details.
Cool. All right, Myron, thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. It was great to hear the long form of your experience.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Well, until next time. There are a lot of people out there talking about the infinite banking strategy and whether or not it makes sense for them. To find out what it's all about and if it's a fit for you, visit controlandcompound.com/Andrew Hines, where my audience can gain exclusive access to books, podcasts, and webinars tailor-made for real estate investors.